That is the cutest octopus that I've ever seen in my life. Why is it so cute? Why do they make monsters in the show so cute? I don't know. Okay, now that that's out of the way, this is not going to be a fun episode. Episode 11 is the worst episode of High Guardian Spice. It is a culmination of everything wrong the series has been doing since the start. Honestly, I don't even know where to begin. Do I start with the elephant in the room, or... Yeah, let's start with the elephant in the room. This is the Snapdragon episode. This is the one that's going to go deepest into their conflict with identity. So, our four main characters win the ability to fight a sea dragon called the Sipith. I apologize if I mispronounce that in advance. It's just an awful word that sounds wrong no matter how I pronounce it. It's a sea dragon that's developed a taste for mermaids. And tagging along for the ride is Cal and Snapdragon. Cal's main purpose in this episode, in this show, is to make fun of Snapdragon for wearing a dress at Halloween. Cal spends the first few minutes mocking Snapdragon, and then Snap snaps and beats the tar out of Cal, to the point of breaking their wrist. Because of their injury, Caraway decides that Snapdragon can't go underwater and fight the dragon thing. And as we all know, Caraway is the wisest person in the world.
Rosemary, I'll hold Flowering Thorn. You won't need her where you're going.
Okay, we'll be talking about the girl's plot after this, but I just have to say this now. Caraway takes Rosemary's sword because, quote-unquote, that's not a useful weapon underwater. Parsley has a warhammer! Time has a bow! This isn't even basic combat shit. If you know basic logic, basic physics, you can understand that a sword, especially a magic one, is infinitely better as a weapon underwater than a goddamn warhammer. The less surface area that the weapon has underwater, the more effective it is. Which is why mer people are frequently depicted with tridents or spears. And don't even get me started on the bow.
My hammer cuts through the water!
Oh, and the magic sword can't? Okay, now that's out of the way, enough distraction. Snapdragon and Caraway. So, because Snapdragon isn't able to or isn't allowed to go underwater, the broken wrist makes that a little vague. They're given the job to be a lookout, which is a very important job, I guess.
There! I see it!
I'm sure the girls will appreciate that Snapdragon can see the monster. Totally helpful to the mission. What are you even trying to accomplish here? So, this episode delves into Snapdragon's backstory. We get to learn the origins of toxic masculinity. We have a flashback to Snapdragon's childhood, and in it, Snapdragon's brother takes a rabbit that they found.
You sound like a girl!
And then their father comes in and goads Snapdragon into trying to take the rabbit back from him. Then Snapdragon gives their father a good thrust to the stomach. And it's Psychology 101. Snapdragon learns violence from dad, and so they're violent in the modern day. It all makes sense. Snapdragon is in a school that teaches the students combat. Isn't that what the point of this whole thing is? Learning to fight. Learning to defeat adversaries to protect those who are weaker than you and can't defend themselves. Isn't that what the girls are doing right at this very second? Or are they trying to tame the sea dragon with flowers and laughter? They try to keep the thing alive and try to defeat it without any violence, but it doesn't work. This is a setting with dragons, goblins, a demented cat girl who turned an entire city to stone. It's clear what they're going for. Men are the ones who are encouraged to fight and be violent and use violence to get what they want. It's the generational curse of toxic masculinity. It's an issue that a lot of shows are trying to explore as of late. But this is the wrong setting to do this particular idea. In a modern society with modern sensibilities and modern safety, yeah, sure. In a fantasy world where even the Academy says you're gonna die, it doesn't make sense. This episode is going to try and get into Snapdragon's identity, and it's the closest the series comes to in trying to establish that they are trans. But this isn't a gendered thing in the world of High Guardian Spice. If the girls, Parsley and Time, didn't fight the demon in the last episode, they'd be dead. End of story. This even applies to certain times and places in the real world. In places like the American Western frontier or ancient Sparta, women had capabilities to do combat, or barring that, to actually handle themselves in the wild. Because the wild don't give a shit who you are. Man or woman, the wild will fuck your shit up. This goes doubly so in a fantasy world.
You've some skill with a blade.
The women of this country learned long ago. Those without swords can still die upon them.
Boy, spend less time with pets and more time sparring with your brothers.
You know, that does sound a little demented, until you realize that Snapdragon's teachers would say the same fucking thing if Snapdragon was slacking in class. You know, if the teachers were actually competent. This does not work in this setting. At least not when Snapdragon is going to a school to learn combat. Or is the lesson here that Snapdragon isn't cut out to be a guardian at all? If Snapdragon didn't try to fight back in the flashback, that rabbit would have been tossed and possibly killed. The episode tries to show that Snapdragon was taught wrong, but what the world that this show takes place in shows that either Snapdragon only learned half of the lesson or internalized the lesson wrong. Snapdragon is taught to fight when something, a living thing, is taken from them. Tell me it's wrong to do that if, say, someone is taking your dog. And the episode is trying to equate that with beating the shit out of someone because they insulted you. Insulted you in a horrible way, given, but I think we can all agree that those two things are not equivalent.
They are not the same thing.
You're lucky you get to believe that. No one's questioning your manhood.
In my experience, there's more than one path to becoming a respected warrior.
I want you to take a look at these two lines written out. I'm going to underline two of them. These words are not equivalent. They are not the same thing. I could say a bunch of different things. Women are warriors. We see female warriors in every single episode of the show. And not every man is a warrior. These two people are talking about different things.
If you've chosen the violent, reactive path, then we're at an impasse.
And this is why it's a problem. Gee, I wonder why someone would think that the only way to be a warrior is through violence. Proofread your goddamn scripts. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of this.
I don't think that changing course would be so easy for me. I hate being big. My boxy shoulders, and this?
How do you convey gender dysphoria in a character? I know, just have them talk about it. A lot. That'll work. Let's have Snapdragon just talk about the parts of a male body and how they don't like those. This is a scene that we're going to be talking about for a while, so buckle up. Let's start with something that I have to establish. To some people here, this is enough to establish that Snapdragon is trans without any conflict and confusion. Personally, I don't think so. I don't think that the show did nearly enough. In fact, I don't think so, I know so. And you know how I know this? Because I've watched tons of other High Guardian Spice reviewers, a lot of them, and almost all of them, left or right, conservative or progressive, refer to Snapdragon as male. And the few that don't learned it from secondary or behind-the-scenes sources. The most basic problem here is that this isn't something that Snapdragon ever hinted about in any way whatsoever beforehand. You might say that the mermaid dress was hinting, but Snapdragon said that Amaryllis was the one who recommended it, as in it wasn't Snapdragon's idea. Honestly, a lot of this scene here just comes right out of nowhere.
My dad had a full beard by the time he was 12. I don't want that. I want smooth skin.
If I may be so bold, a lot of cis guys don't want facial hair. That's why they shave. Also, Snapdragon is an awkward, lanky teenager. A lot of guys who were or are awkward, lanky teenagers didn't or don't like being awkward, lanky teenagers. They wouldn't use these exact words because these exact words are very clinical, so clinical that it's almost out of character for Snapdragon to be using them.
I'm not like my father or my brothers. I hate being big.
And this, is not something that should have been mentioned. Let's start with the fact that some women are big. I mean, yes, men are usually bigger, but big women do exist. 1 out of 100 women in the US is 6 feet tall or taller. If that's not your definition, there are also female bodybuilders. Even taking the real world out of context, Time is just about as big and tall as Snapdragon, and she's a girl. Meanwhile, Parnell, a guy, is small. Very, very small. A bigger problem here is that this comes after the scene with the backstory, or honestly the fact that the backstory exists at all. It's incredibly easy to interpret this as Snapdragon associating these traits with their father. Snapdragon mentions their brothers and their father in this, and it can come across as, I don't want to be like these people that hurt me, that I'm scared of, that made my life difficult. Remember how I said that this episode is all of High Guardian Spice's problems culminating? The male characters that Snapdragon has had the most interaction with is their father, their brothers, and Cal. I.e., most of the men that they've known have been outright jerks. And let's not forget episode 6, where not only do we have the lunkhead Aster, but Sage going on and on about how bad men were.
Guy friendship is different. It isn't the same. Guys don't talk about their feelings.
Snapdragon's experiences can be read more as an internalized hatred of men, or an internalization of bad stereotypes, than outright gender dysphoria, because that is what we have seen on the screen. If I may be personal for a moment, it's another thing that I know happens, and I know that this happens from personal experience. As a teenager, I had a lot of bad male role models. My father was absent. My stepfather I was afraid of. And even in the media that was my escapism. The boys were always idiots. They were getting into trouble, while the girls were there presented as the proper and smart ones, never debasing themselves like the men did. Or alternatively, the males weren't too far off from what my parents were. As a teenager, I knew that I wasn't that, and I knew that I didn't want to be that, but I did want to be the smart and down-to-earth one, and because of this, I was questioning for a time. When the dialogue isn't so vague that it could be interpreted in several different ways, It's so on the nose that it comes across as forced and unrealistic.
But you can't change what you were born into. You say I can change paths? But it's not like I can just stop being a guy.
It's like the writers want to say something, but at the same time, they don't want to say that thing. Snapdragon goes on and on about body parts, when what Snapdragon means is guy. Caraway is going on and on about warriors, when he means guy. Do we really need innuendo or beating around the bush here? It's not conducive.
You're not weird. Do you know anything about transition magic?
I guess we don't need metaphor. Wait, I thought it was called transformation magic.
I had no idea that what did you call it?
Transition magic.
I didn't know that it existed.
How long have you been going to a magical school that's been going on and on about how new magic can do literally anything?
It's like you get to become yourself, your true self. But it seems exhausting and...
It's exhausting?
I take a potion once a month to keep the spell active.
Yeah, that sounds really exhausting. But yeah, this scene is bad. Very bad.
There are so many paths to becoming your true self, and this one is mine. I'm not saying that it's yours.
Caraway, you want to mention them? No, you don't. The only possible solution that you're going to mention is the transition magic. That is the only one you can think of or want to discuss before the scene is over.
There are always more options than you think.
Okay, that does not solve the issue here. There are a million things that I can say about this one scene, but it's not a good look. There are other possible solutions to Snapdragon's mental anguish. And even if it was gender dysphoria, and Snapdragon was a trans girl, transitioning doesn't solve the violent outbursts, and it doesn't excuse them from fighting in a fighting school. And yet, the one possibility that Caraway offers is transitioning. Let me put it this way, as simply as I can. A political cartoon from a far-right fringe of the internet would probably write this scene very similarly. I know they're not trying to write this way, they're just that incompetent. The more and more that I go on, the more and the more that I analyze this, the more pissed off I get. What were the signs of Snapdragon being trans before this episode? 1. Getting pissed that Sage is denigrating men. 2. Wearing a mermaid dress that Amaryllis recommended, neither of which are things that only women do. The girls kill the sea dragon thing because they had to. That makes them cry. The very next scene, Snapdragon is complaining about their broken wrist, and then they start crying. What are you trying to say after that whole discussion? Is this what being a woman is to you? Crying. And is that something that men don't do? Yeah, I know the stereotype. People are more accepting of women showing their emotions. As a counterpoint to that,
I was crying here earlier.
This seemed like a good place to cry.
also, there's something else that points to Snapdragon not being trans. They refuse the transition magic. And keep in mind, Caraway says that he takes the potion once a month. This implies that the transition is temporary, as in a person could go back and forth. It is also implied that the transition magic has no side effects, because if it does have side effects, Caraway not mentioning them is another bad look. I'm feeling like I'm forgetting something.
We'll be safe inside. The Scypeth can't get in.
Oh right! After all of that, the main plot of this episode is just so secondary. The girls put on magical rings because can't have an anime without a magical girl transformation. Except you can, and you really should, because this is the wrong genre for that. It's episode 10. It's a bit late to start a new romance that will never be resolved. Also, learn new ways to write romance. This is like the 5th time we've seen characters give each other goo-goo eyes for nothing.
Why not stay a mermaid? We'd get to hang out more.
Hey, dinner and a movie first, buddy.
This is Bubbles.
Why is she so cute?
Because she was designed before the merch deal fell through. Then Rosemary dies again. That's pretty cool. We also learned that Rosemary puts dicks in her diary.
I cannot believe how many dogs Rosemary drew in her diary.
That's not so cool. Rosemary tries talking into mermaid English. That's also not cool. Then Sage uses her magic stick, which is kind of cool, admittedly. And then Rosemary puts down the water dragon like Old Yeller, which is very cool. Rest in peace, Duty Dragon the 5th.
I couldn't stop the spell.
It's not your fault, Sage. The effectiveness of new magic conceals how unmanageable it can be.
What the fuck? Okay, crazy ass potions lady. What the hell were you going on about in episode 5?
New magic doesn't require the hours of ritual, the reckoning, the effort. New magic multiplies your power and lets you do what you want. Balance schmalance. You've got a terrasphere now, haven't you?
Like, seriously, everyone has been going on and on and on and on about how fucking great new magic is, and how you can do anything and everything, and why ever use old magic ever? Especially you fucking hag lady and your psychopathic potions class.
The effectiveness of new magic conceals how unmanageable it can be.
Literally everything that you established about new magic, everything, all of it, 100% everything, it is gone in one stupid, broken, useless, worthless line of dialogue. And this line of dialogue is so bad that it makes this episode even uglier and buries even more unfortunate implications within it. I am going to play 2 lines back to back. One from episode 3, and this fucking line of dialogue again.
I was born into a female body, but it wasn't the right body for me. So I used new magic to change it.
It's not your fault, Sage. The effectiveness of new magic conceals how unmanageable it can be.
What are you saying? New magic is unmanageable, huh? The new magic that one character has been spending the episode recommending to a student who is a teenager. Think! This isn't child's play. This isn't a game. You want to deal with serious subject matter, then don't just fuck around and think you're gonna get a ton of social credit by turning in your first pass work. I get it. You wanted representation. But personally, I think that trans people deserve better representation than this. This episode is really bad. No, that's not it. This episode is offensively bad. Like, so bad, I debated ending this whole thing here. Because you cannot redeem a series after an episode like this. After a line like that. After this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this! I know the show had good intentions. But this is exactly where the phrase, "the road to hell is paved with good intentions" comes from. Let's just end this.